This episode brought to you by Discovery Bank. Ready to experience the future of banking now? Get on board. Discovery Bank Limited is an authorized FSP 48657. T's and C's apply. So, you think you want to be a CEO?
I've been told I'm Marmite, right? Actually, some of my investors have told me I'm Marmite, which is okay. It means I've got an opinion.
The power, the status, the money.
One thing I've never done in my life is ask for a pay rise or ask for a promotion. I believe that the market will reward you for what you deliver to it.
Is it all it's cracked up to be?
It's true to say I wanted to build a company that was much more innovative, much more ownership mentality from the get-go. But how it's played out is not quite how I expected.
Stephen Newton got laid off during the global financial crisis. Despite being told it was a terrible idea, he promptly started a consulting business called Elixirr and headquartered it in London. Today, the firm, named by Forbes as one of the world's best management consultancies, employs more than 700 people in 15 offices on 3 continents, half of them in the United States. Elixirr is listed on the main board of the London Stock Exchange, and its approach is getting attention for all the right reasons. I'm Bruce Whitfield. So, what does it take to be a CEO?
What does it take? I think, well, the strange thing about me is I'm an accidental CEO. I never really decided on becoming one, so I knew I was going to go into business, and I didn't ever set myself an expectation to be the chief executive of a company. And so for me, it's kind of been a journey to get there. And then as I'm there, it's my own company, of course, that I built and I've listed in London. Sometimes I think I'm not built for this, It takes a certain kind of individual. And my chairman's a very interesting character. His name's Gavin Patterson. And Gavin used to be the CEO of British Telecom. And he says to me, BT is obviously one of the biggest companies on the FTSE. And he says to me this, and he's been fantastic as my chairman because, I've never been a CEO of a listed company. I just happened to list my company that's, on the FTSE. And so he's been giving me some great coaching. And he's always said to me that, he's a gun for hire and I'm an entrepreneur. And he said, there's a difference. He said, I'm paid to be a CEO. You paid to build companies. And those two things aren't actually necessarily aligned. And I for example, I like to give people accountability. I like to give people, I like to treat people the way I like to be treated. And the CEO job of a public company is a very public persona, and you get measured all the time and you get, and I've learned that actually sometimes I'm a very honest person. So being honest is actually difficult in a public setting because you've got to say the party line. You can't say, oh shit, we've had a terrible quarter. It's just been awful. You should just see how bad our clients will be. You can't say that kind of stuff. It's an interesting journey because you want to be truthful, but you also can't be natural with it, if you know what I mean. Maybe that's a better way of describing it. It's not natural to me. Let's put it that way.
I don't know if it's natural for anybody, but some people are just more compliant and more rigid and can operate within tighter frames, whereas people with an entrepreneurial bent are used to making a plan as they go along. And when things don't work out, fess up, get over it quickly and move on to the next solution. Fine on AIM, the alternative investment market where you first started, but then you recently progressed onto the FTSE main board. And that comes with a lot of really rigid, boring stuff, doesn't it?
It does indeed. It's funny. I used to play chess with my stepfather. And I used to always get frustrated at the rules, right? I mean, even playing a game like chess. And he said to me, Stephen, you've got to play by the rules to play the game, right? And so, that was a lesson I learned early days, but I like to step outside of the rules. I mean, when I started Elixirr, there wasn't a single person apart from my co-founder that said it was a good idea. Like I said, who needs another consultancy? Who needs another strategy consultancy? So why is it going to be different? And that's the thing with an entrepreneur. You do things that other people don't think are possible. And that's the very definition of an entrepreneur, actually, is doing something that someone doesn't think is achievable. And therefore, it's not being done by everybody. It's just being done by a few people who create companies. And so now, as I'm sitting in situ of a company that has 750 employees, I've got, $150 million turnover, a pound turnover business. It's much more structured, much more managed. Fortunately, I've got very good people around me. I have noticed, I do know my weaknesses. And I think that's perhaps one of the things that you've got to do is that I hired early days in Elixirr, one of my former Accenture partners who was the COO of Accenture in the UK. She's been my COO for the last sort of 8 years or so. And my CFO has been amazing. We brought him in as a public company CFO. They're really good people at keeping, drawing the lines around the field and saying, Steve, you've got to stay within this box, And I try really hard, and occasionally I step outside. But, I try and step outside for things that are adding value. I do think that if you stay too rigid, and this is perhaps a criticism of public companies, is they become too formulaic and not creative enough. And it's actually part of what we as a company do for our clients is try to help them be more innovative and disruptive. And it almost flies in the face of good governance in sometimes, because you need to give people enough rope to hang themselves, but they can't, literally the whole company can't hang themselves, if you know what I mean. So I do find it a constant personal challenge. It's something I have to discipline myself around every day, It
does come down to who you hire. And I think at the beginning, you were able to be involved in every hire up until a point, and I don't know whether it gets to 30 or 40 or 50 or 100, where it's simply impossible. But by then you hope that there is an institutional framework and a knowledge that says these are the sorts of people we want in, and we have to be really rigorous about it.
It's interesting. You bring up such a fascinating point. And I don't know who's attributed it with this comment, and it's perhaps a bit of an urban myth or an urban legend line, but I should use it anyway. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, right?
Drucker, 1980s. There we go.
Drucker, 1980s. Thank you. Now at least I can source it properly. But it's absolutely true. Like I think that if I think of how I've built my partner team, I've got now over 45 partners, right? And they're all owners of the business. And I started hiring from the best brands in the industry, the McKinseys, the Bains, the KPMGs, the Deloittes, the PwCs. And what I found when I hired partners from those businesses, they were so institutionalized. They were order takers, not market makers. The business came at them because they had a brand that attracted it. And it wasn't so much, obviously hugely talented, and I'm not knocking those brands because they're all magnificent companies. And I've been a student in three of them. So I'm not a critic of them necessarily. I think they could be better. Hence, I built Elixirr. But I did discover trying to hire good partners that getting them from those big brands was really quite difficult, because they just don't have the same cause and effect between deliver client value and get paid revenue and feeding the team of people I employ. They don't really own that crossover point. And when you look at the consulting industry, it's a $1 trillion industry. Half of it is served by those big brands, the household brands you all know. And then half of it is served by a whole plethora of small boutique consultancies, all started by people not dissimilar to me who learned their trade in the big firms and then decided that they wanted more latitude, wanted to be more honest, wanted to be more creative, wanted a bit more accountability. And then they had to go into the market. And there's a characteristic about those people is that they're actually better because they don't have a brand. They have to sell their actual knowledge and their actual capability. And if they're not better than a brand, no one ever got fired for hiring IBM, right? I mean, that's a big hurdle you have to overcome. So, and you discover they own the entrepreneurial cycle much better. They understand that if they don't sell work, add value to their client, and that allows them to charge their client fees, then you can't pay the people you hire, and you're on this downward spiral, Whereas, and so for me, it was all about those consulting leaders that had a very entrepreneurial and ownership mindset, as the core foundation stone of culture.
How long did it take you to figure that out? There's an insecurity when you begin something new and people are telling you you're mad. And so a little voice in the back of your head says, I'm mad. So I better get grown-ups to come in, people who know this business better than I do. So let me get the big name people in, and then we'll create this big name team, and then we can list and we can take over the world.
Yeah, sounds easier.
Some point you must realize, hold on a second, we're not growing as fast as we could be if more people thought like I do.
Yeah, I can't tell you the exact moment, but it certainly happened that when I looked at the statistics of my partner team, it must have been when I had about 12 or 13 partners. And I looked at them and I went, of the partners I've hired from brands, only 50% of them have succeeded. And I thought to myself, well, I may as well not even interview them. I may as well just toss a coin and say, come on in. I've just as much chance of success. And I actually started thinking, perhaps we're not interviewing, because this is what you start doing first, don't you? You start thinking, perhaps we're not doing proper interview process. Maybe we're not good at selecting good people. Maybe we're actually not that good at judging people. So you start doing that whole self-doubt cycle. And then I realized what I just described to you earlier. It's more that the personalities that live in those businesses don't own the cause and effect between their performance in the market and the ability to pay people as directly as people who start businesses and have to do that just to pay their own salary, So it kind of grew up as a recognition. And then we took it further and said, well, where do we find these people? We find them in the smaller boutique firms, the more hungry environments where you've got to scrap and fight to stay alive. Those are our partners who just obviously succeed. And then the natural ones are the ones that come from within because they're steeped in the culture. You've worked with them for so long, and they always succeed 99% of the time, because by the time they've gone through the process of getting there, you've seen them in the trenches, you've seen them in their good and bad moments, you've seen it all. So those are the most successful, but then definitely from the boutique firms. Yeah. But to answer the question, I think it's by osmosis, not by a eureka moment.
But you have over time bought 8 other boutiques. So you are consolidating boutique ones because the mindsets align, right?
Yeah. So Bruce, again, people said I started out with this grand plan, and I would say that it's evolved. Like any good strategy, it's built, and I've seen the opportunity evolve. It's true to say I wanted to build a company that was much more innovative, much more ownership mentality from the get-go. But how it's played out is not quite how I expected. And you just hit on another one. I didn't think we'd go out and buy boutiques necessarily. But it turns out that whether by accident or by design, I've created something which is, with Graham, my co-founder, a platform for entrepreneurial boutique-based businesses. Because weirdly, one of the key cornerstones of being a boutique or being an entrepreneur is your accountability to being an owner, your genuine ownership. Like I always say, you look after the flat you own far more than the flat you rent, right? It's just a natural thing for people. If you own it, you care for it much more. And, I just think that when other founders of companies look at their position and they've maybe spent 15 years building this company that's call it 10 million pound turnover, produces 3 million pound profit, and they've got, 30 or 40 or 50 employees. But they're at a point in their career where they want to monetize some of that, because I promise you, when you built that company, you haven't taken a lot of money out yourself by then. You're feeding a lot of it back into the company. So maybe you feel like it's time that you took some of the stress of the mortgage needs to go and some of this needs to go and da-da-da. And so you want to sell your business, or at least parts of it. You've got 2 options generally. You normally go private equity when you get another outside shareholder who's going to come in and essentially own your company. That's what private equity do.
And squeeze you often until the pips squeak, really. That's the experience of many people with private equity.
Yeah, and the other alternative is, I guess, a trade sale, right? And that means your company gets consumed by an Accenture or a Ernst & Young or whatever it is. What we try to do is to say, this is a platform upon which you can take your business to the next level. Because what we have here is, let's take, we just bought TLC Advisory it's our Quadrant actually is our latest purchase. But let me use TLC Advisory as the example. They have, say, 50 clients selling strategy work, the best strategy work to those 50 clients. We have over 500 clients. What's TLC's biggest problem is access to market. It's not talent, because as I described to you before, is that the talent they have, otherwise the clients wouldn't buy them over the Bains or the McKinseys. But they just don't have access to market. Now they've got access to the market through our 500 clients. And the benefit there is that all my partners, when they see TLC come in, because they're owners of the business, they go, more opportunity to sell revenue to my client means my shares become more valuable. And that proposition doesn't exist. There is, in the consulting industry, there's only one listed consultancy that's similar to us, and that's Booz Allen. and they listed on the Chicago Stock Exchange. The big difference with them is they're about 80-90% public sector, whereas we do no government work. Our work is all in the private sector. And so if you're an investor even, it's interesting thing, people don't understand the consulting industry. I've been in it for, give or take, 1 or 2 other startups. I've been in the industry for almost 35 years. And every year, without fail, the industry grows between 5 and 10%. Even through dot-com bubble, through financial crisis, it grows every year. And it's a basic fact when people think about it. Business is becoming more complicated, not less. It's becoming more technical, not less. And so you need more expertise, expert advice rather than, institutional advice. And so I've done 2 IPOs now, the AIM IPO and the main board IPO. Because I did the AIM IPO, it doesn't mean I'm an expert and I didn't need advisors for the main market IPO. Do you know what I mean? I still had all the advisors I needed around the table, because that's what you do. When you do something that's technical, like a listing, you need advice. And the consulting industry, like AI, internet, 30 years on from the dot-com bubble, and we're still teaching people how to use it.
But here's the thing with AI, because, there's a lot of hype in the world about AI is going to replace consultants. Consultants are the first to go, and there are people dancing on the grave of consultancies. And I'm not 100% sure that is even partly true.
Well, there's 2 things I'd like to say. I use the analogy of the dot-com bubble because I started a dot-com company trying to get on that bandwagon, leaving KPMG. And at the time, I don't know if you recall, Bruce, but the whole world was talking about the death of the high street and no one's ever going to buy things through shops anymore. And, there was a whole bunch of hype, and there are going to be hundreds of people out of work. And what has happened actually is it just changes the way you do things, right? So you now have an online opportunity and an offline opportunity, and the propositions need to come together in a way that brings a seamless service to the consumer. And through that journey, that's 30 years later, and clients are still signing us up to help them do a direct-to-consumer business model for them, right? And so the internet is the gift that's kept on giving to the consultancy industry for the last 30 years. And AI is going to be exactly the same. Now, it's true that there are certain consultancies, and the bigger ones are the ones that are probably going to suffer this the most, is because they kind of sweat average a little bit, and they build these huge pyramids. And what AI does is it takes away the edges of the pyramids, because all the work at the edge of the pyramids does, that the more junior staff, the heavy lifting, the research, AI can do like a lot of that stuff. And so I think those businesses are the ones that are going to suffer because they're not designed for this moment. They've actually got to restructure themselves to be far more nimble and agile. And as I just described, I think they're going to struggle because it's not a cultural thing, as you pointed out earlier, Bruce, yourself, that, culture is so important. And, I would say this because I'm the CEO of this company, but I would say I think Elixirr, if we were designed, and I admitted at the start that we weren't entirely designed at the start, I like to say we evolved. I'm a Darwinianist when it comes to our strategy, right? I think that we've almost perfectly made for this moment because we've never been a pyramid. It hasn't been our model. We've always been senior people, a tube, a few support staff, but a tube. In actual fact, for us, it levels the playing field because what the big firms can do with these pyramids, we can now do with AI. So it's actually a very interesting time. And I think the pressure is going to happen at the very old institutional structured type consultancies, if you like.
From the start, the ambition was clear: to build a bank that could be more than a bank. One that rewards better decisions, connects the ecosystems that shape your life, and gets smarter the more you engage. That ambition is now a reality. With Discovery Bank, your entire financial life comes together in one intelligent platform, accessed through a single app. It understands your behavior, works harder for you over time, and helps you build your financial future with confidence. Discovery Bank, the future of banking. Now.
I'm curious as to the startup story of Elixirr, because I recall having this conversation with people like Brian Joffe and Adrian Gore and Robbie Brosen, people you will know personally and you will know their histories very well. But Brosen and Joffe started Nando's and Bidvest respectively in 1987 at possibly the worst time in the cycle. Adrian Gore starts discovery, possibly at the worst time in 1992, just before the uncertainty of a transition to democracy. You take a look at the global financial crisis at a time where most people are desperately holding on to their jobs for dear life because having a job at that point is better than having no job. And in the middle of all of that, you go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start a consultancy and do it like nobody else is doing it at the moment, because I think that's a really good idea. And as you said earlier, you and your business partner, Graham, were the only two people in the world who thought, one, the timing's good, two, this is a really good idea, and three, actually, we can have an impact and grow.
So I'd love to pat myself on the back and say it was all designed that way, Bruce. But, as I said, I'm too honest for that. So the simple truth is, I was made redundant from Accenture at that time.
Oh, were you?
Yeah. So, and it was one of those things. I became a level...
Thing like a burning platform, is there?
Yeah, well, quite. But I became a level 2 partner about 3 or 4 years before that. And that was very senior in the company. It was quite senior. But there comes a point where you get so senior, you have to be institutionalized. And as I think you've probably gathered from this chat so far, is I find it very difficult to play within a very political environment, a very lack of honesty environment. So I fell foul of the politics there, and they asked me to leave, and so my hand was forced a little bit. Okay, and the bigger question, actually, you should ask my co-founder Graham this, because he was young at the time. He was about 26, 27. And I was 39, and I'd been working with him quite closely, and we'd become quite good friends. And I knew that if I was going to do this, I needed some help. And so I convinced him to leave. He was an employee, a manager at the time, but I've given him the co-founder status because he was the first person to come with me to do it, showed the belief in it and belief in what I was going to do. But it turns out that actually when everyone's selling, it's the right time to buy. And so it actually... my hand was forced, but it is true that, it was tough at that time. But again, I say this even through the Ukraine war and through, the few of the hurdles we've had with the Israeli situation, etc., how that's affected markets and how that's affected business confidence. I say that if you are the type of firm that no CEO stops running their business because there's a war, in actual fact, what they do is they become more measured about what they spend their money on. They don't stop spending. They just say, I only want to spend money on those things that really matter. And if you're doing the projects that really matter, it doesn't affect you. So that's always been my mantra with Elixirr, is we've got to be at the center of the strategy. And if you're at the center of the strategy, CEOs don't just stop their strategies when the macroeconomics don't suit them. And there's other things at play there too, Bruce, is, if in downturns, consultancies have to be nimble. You manage cost reduction as a story. And, in upturns, your revenue enhancement, business acquisition, it's as long as you play the system appropriately and understand where the business pressure lies, you can work within that to add value. And if you're adding value, then it's one thing I've never done in my life is ask for a pay rise or ask for a promotion, right? I believe that the market will reward you for what you deliver to it, and in my case, my market are my clients. And if I'm adding value, they'll pay us and we'll make good money, because people do. If you give them economic advantage themselves, then they don't mind you taking your economic advantage, And so I think that's a very important point to this all too, is that doesn't matter what cycle you're in. If you're adding value, you're adding value, and you will get paid for it.
Elon Musk, I think there's a quote that says something along the lines of, you get paid in direct proportion to the level of problems you solve, which is quite an elegant way of putting it. Do you scare the living daylights out of people? Because you've got 15 offices across the world, some in America, some in Europe, and some in the UK, South Africa. Because your mindset is typically South African, in that if there is a wall and it's too high to jump over, you either go under it or around it. You don't wait for somebody else to come and dismantle the wall. It's a fundamentally different culture to many of the cultures that you will face in many markets. And therefore, hopefully you draw clients to you that are looking for solutions, not for excuses. But do you scare the living daylights out of them sometimes?
I've been told I'm Marmite, right? Actually, some of my investors have told me I'm Marmite, because which is okay. It means I've got an opinion. Do you know what I mean? Like why would you want an advisor that doesn't give you their opinion? Then I may as well not have you as an advisor. If you disagree with me, obviously do it politely, obviously do it, but I don't want you to be a shrinking violet. And just because I say it's a certain way, it's the right way. If you've got a point of view and I value your opinion, I want to hear it, right? So as I say, I treat people like I like to be treated. If someone doesn't like what I'm doing or like what I'm saying, they're quite entitled to say it. And I feel the same in reverse. Like, I feel like it's a thing, but it does. I'm certain it alienates certain clients, and I'm certain it alienates certain investors, and I'm certain it alienates certain employees. But the one thing that I have discovered, certainly with regards to my team in Elixirr, is that pressure is the privilege of a high performer. No one who's ever achieved anything significant hides from pressure. They all lean into it. And pressure requires you to have a point of view. You've got to stand up and be counted, and you've got to own that situation. And if you mess up, you've got to be man enough, if you like, to say, I got that wrong and I'm moving on. You've got to hold people to a performance standard. And this is actually perhaps one of the more controversial things I'll say here is I discriminate on one thing only, and that's performance. I don't have any other discrimination metrics I put in mind. This is why I can't stand affirmative action in South Africa so much, right? Because it's really a bad way to hold standards high. And the only way you grow things is if you keep standards high and those standards pull everyone up to that standard. It's super important that you measure on performance, because otherwise, the standards will just drop and the performance levels come down. And it's the one thing that I'm fastidious on in Elixirr is that, if you underperform, you're out. This isn't a charity. It's not my grandfather died and therefore I couldn't come to work for 2 months. No, that doesn't work, right? Yeah, we obviously have empathy. We're human beings, but I don't see the Springboks accepting someone on the wing who just can't catch a ball because they fill a quota, right? If you think of the culture and what Rusty has done with that team, the way he's built such a high-performance culture there, like everyone expects it of one another. And high performers love that. They love being in environments like that. Low performers don't.
In an environment of 750 people, 45 partners, teams of consultants who go out and put themselves on the line, their own income depends on their contribution that they make to the whole. They know where the weak links are. And if you, as the leader of that organization, is not dealing with the weak links, the center falls apart really quickly, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is probably one of the hardest things you have to, unless you are a narcissist, I think it's very hard having gone through the experience myself, as I've just fessed up to, being made redundant or being asked to leave a firm. It is a terrible thing to have to experience. It really is. But in the long run, Accenture almost did me a favor, because I would have been a problem in that firm. I would have been desperately unhappy because I would have been a fish out of water. And so in a way, you've got to take those hard decisions. It's tough doing it. It really is tough, because you as I say, unless you're a narcissist, you have empathy for people, and you don't want to put people in a position where their egos are bruised, but they also have a livelihood issue now. They've got to go out and find work. Unless you make those decisions for people who aren't fit for purpose, who don't fit into the organization design that you have, you will create a cancer in your firm, and you'll make them very unhappy too.
You and Lee Child have got something in common. Lee Child, the creator of Jack Reacher, he was a difficult employee and he was let go. And if he had not been let go, Jack Reacher would never have been born. He wouldn't have sold $2 billion worth of books. There's some alignment there.
There you go.
I mean, yes, being made redundant is a big blow to anybody, but you also had 3 goes at starting your own businesses. And each one of those failed for different reasons and at different times. The first one, there were 6 equal partners and no leader emerging from there, and everybody's too polite to put up their hands. So you each lost £100,000 that you put into that. The next one, I think you were selling African art. I forget what the third one was.
A hedge fund trading company, yeah.
Hedge fund. You wrote the code yourself.
Exactly, yeah.
And you went from £50,000 to £500,000, thought you were a genius, and then lost everything. And now I remember.
That's what the markets do to you, eh?
Those clashes with the real world are fundamental to the way in which you birth Elixirr then, surely.
Yeah, I mean, I hate all these little analogies, these things people throw around. They say, consultants, give me a watch and I'll tell you the time, So that's kind of like what the criticism is of the consulting industry. I do have criticisms of the consulting industry. And so, of course, because I'm in it, I'm trying to make it better. And one of them is that people get disconnected from real world business, even the responsibility for P&L. Like if you've been a P&L owner in a corporate, you have a different mindset to the way you operate than if you've just been a person selling hours. And I sometimes find professional consultants who have never really experienced real world, P&L ownership or line responsibility and, that kind of thing. Because what happens in professional services, as you probably know, is a lot of the functions such as hiring and firing staff, not every partner deals with that. There's a group of people that deal with that, whereas functional leaders in companies often have to take those decisions and be accountable to that kind of thing. As a simple example, I think the biggest lessons, actually, like lesson number one from my first startup, when I had 6 equal partners, we'd all on paper made an equal investment, but I made by far and away the biggest emotional investment, because I was 30 years old, my son was 6 months old, and I just bought a house for £140,000. It was around 2000, so you could do anything at that time. I went to the bank and said, I want to do renovations. Can I have another £100,000, please? They said, sure thing. I got the £100,000, resigned from my job and put the £100,000 on the table to start this company, But the rest of the guys were late 30s all the way up to 60. So far more established in their careers. Their personal asset position was more stabilized. And so for me, I was risking way more emotionally into that project. And I realized then that you have to find that connection to the emotional desire for people to want to participate. And that's where I was fixated on with Elixirr, to make sure everyone was an owner. Because unless everyone is a significant owner, like Bruce, I don't want to put too fine a point on this, but my wife, when I was having my crisis after being asked to leave Accenture, I went to dinner with her. She's a teacher. We sat over dinner. My son was 9 and my daughter was 7 at the time. And I said to her, what's your biggest achievement in life? And please don't tell me it's our children, like something outside of that, okay? And she says, well, I've taught 300 people to read and write. And I went, oh, that's pretty cool, actually. That is pretty cool. I've got to do something now with my life that actually adds value to others. And I must say, I'm very proud of what Elixirr has done. So of my 45 partners, at least half of them are multimillionaires now. That's the company I've created. They have shares in my company that, I've got partners in my firm worth £10 million. And that's changing the generational wealth of their families, Okay, not to put too fine a point on it, but I was talking to an analyst. Analyst is the entry level. It happens to be my daughter, by the way. Truth be told, I don't often speak to analysts nowadays with 750 people, but I was talking to her and she was going on about her shares in Elixirr. And she's got a little nest egg at 26 or £30,000. I didn't have £30,000 at 26. And that's the difference that this little firm is now making for people,
Is that what it means to be a CEO, though? That certainly in your world, to create, to add value, yes, your unit does better and generations of your family unit will be fine. However, you seem to take great satisfaction from the fact that they've enabled the building of this enterprise and therefore you're willing to share in it.
Oh, geez, without question, Bruce. I mean, I actually feel that even wider than just my company. Like, I feel it as a South African. Like, I feel like I actually did this the other day. I mean, Claremont School in Cape Town? Yeah, so that's a commuter school, and the kids all come from basically townships. That a lot of them travel 3 hours a day to get to Claremont. Do you know where Claremont came in the Western Cape in matric results this year? Second. Now, I went to Wynberg. Wynberg isn't even in the top 20. Okay, it's crazy, right? So I said to these kids, we did a thing where we brought some professors of maths and science down. It's just a charity thing, a foundation thing we were doing. And I was giving them a speech at the end. And I said, look, I don't want to tell you about my background as hardship, because I'm sure some of you have stories that are way more hard than what I've dealt with. But the real thing you need to do here is don't allow your history to be your anchor. Allow it to be your platform. It must motivate you. For example, I lost a brother when I was 18 months old. My father was non-existent. My mother brought me up as a single mother. She was a working mother. In those days, mothers didn't work. So I had to deal with nannies and stuff like that. This is not a story that's exclusive to me. And some of the kids I was talking to, probably have far worse stories by an order of magnitude because they're living in tin shacks, right? And the murder and the loss of life and all of that these people are dealing with. But I said to them, now, you're in a school now that came second in the Western Cape for academics. Look what I've achieved. I'm not saying, I'm quite pleased with what I've achieved with regards to the company and the partners I've helped build wealth for and things like that. But I wasn't saying it as a, wow, look at me. I'm saying you guys have actually a better start than me now. This is your future. You can go after this future. That's what we need to get these kids to see. You know, if we can show them what they can do with what they have and don't let them use their history as a reason why they don't perform, but rather as a reason why they damn well will. That's the good old South African instinct, man. It's the corral instinct, man. That's the whole thing from the very get-go, isn't it? It's how we built. But we need to help those kids understand that, you know. I do speak to the analysts. I have a presentation I give to them once a year where Graham and I tell the whole story of the firm. And I always tell them this. I say, we get 10,000 applicants a year into this firm. 10,000. Think about that. And they're all from the best universities. Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford, Berkeley, you name it. The best universities, 10,000. We get, I think the number was 40 applicants for every position. So intelligence is a commodity, right? I can get intelligence anywhere. What I can't get is teamwork, passion, motivation, commitment, dedication, resilience, tenacity. Those are the things you can choose to bring to the table, or you can choose not to. But if you're going to sit here and tell me I'm clever, so just pay me for being clever, you can go, I can get someone else who's clever.
When those 5 or 6 attributes, AI can't do.
That's exactly the point. And I believe that's why, I mean, you've obviously used AI, Bruce. It's magnificent in the way it can improve productivity, right? It is magnificent. But to your point, people buy from people. At the end of the day, real business is done between two people, a willing buyer and a willing seller. And, you know, those are human things. I'm sure there's going to be lots of automation in transactional process, but in the real business decision-making, those things are human beings, or at least there's going to be a big human influence over that. And human beings are fallible. They have weaknesses. They have strengths. And they're emotional. I mean, one of the earliest lessons I learned in KPMG is people buy for 3 reasons. Political reasons, emotional reasons, and rational reasons. And 99% of the time, intelligent people think it's all rational. It's not actually. It's about a third rational. The political and emotional things actually often are far more important to the decision-making process. And unless you understand that as an advisor, you can give people the rational argument, but you've also got to give them the political and emotional side to it, right? That makes a good consultant. I've always felt so. I just apply that to my life.
Have the courage to be Marmite. Not everyone will like you, but it does mean that you have an opinion. Have the courage to stand up and be counted. Treat others as you want to be treated. Be direct, even if it's not popular. And pressure. Pressure is the privilege of the high performer. Nobody who's ever built anything of any significance has ever shied away from pressure. Stephen Newton, the chief executive at London-listed consultancy Elixirr. This episode of So You Think You Want to Be a CEO is powered by Discovery Bank. Discovery Bank is an authorized FSP 48657. T's and C's apply.